Thank you for joining the ACA Small Business Bootcamp and Resource Collective for this Tuesday, May 18th. I'm Robert Theobald, Small Business Ombudsman and Vice President of Small Business Services, and we're excited to have you with us today. If you haven't been on these boot camps before, we like to start by thanking all of our community partners. We could not do these sessions without them. With over 100 community partners, this boot camp is a statewide initiative supported by community partners from throughout the state. As you know, the boot camp is designed to help businesses work through the COVID crisis and return stronger than ever. And it is not just a boot camp, but a resource collective and a content library. So to look at the website, you went to this website to register for today's session. But if you didn't scroll through the whole website, you'll find that on the website, we have our link to the resource collective. And then at the bottom of the website, we have a section that's called the archive. It lists all the different boot camp sessions by week. And with over a year's worth of content, we have created a massive content library. So you can go back and look at different sessions that we've done. We've recorded them and included the slide decks and other materials that may have been provided, and have this giant content library from experts, from those community partners throughout their expertise. And it's available to you at no cost. You can go back in and review these anytime you want. Share them with friends that may have businesses that need that content information and whatnot. It's available to you. So that's a great resource. Additionally, as I mentioned, the resource collective link that's on there. The resource collective is a repository for the tools and guides that our community partners have also provided to help small businesses return stronger throughout the pandemic. And this is just a sample of some of those guides and resources that are available on the resource collective. As you can see, we touched every type of industry, and we have a lot of guides and resources that were designed specifically for small businesses during this time. Another way to stay informed about small business and business happenings is the ACA's COVID-19 Arizona Business Resources website. And this webpage, you can find business guidance, financial resources, and other great items. The financial resources piece is key because that's where we list all the loans and grant information at the local, state, and federal levels. And we keep that updated as often as we hear about something new or updates to existing programs. So you definitely want to keep an eye on that page. Additionally, the ACA has a number of different programs that businesses can leverage to help support their growth and recovery. Our small business services can help with navigating through the SBA, working with the SBDC, working with SCORE or other no-cost business service providers. We can help support local businesses looking for funding with local banking contacts, local lending contacts. Our workforce division is a great group that has programs for hiring employees if you're looking to hire, as well as some funding programs for training and upskilling employees. And then our Arizona MEP, our Manufacturing Extension Partnership, they have programs to support manufacturers, small to medium sized throughout the state, and working through their emergency planning, their COVID needs, lean manufacturing, et cetera. They can help from A to Z in manufacturing with your organization. Additionally, a lot of people are looking to start their own business or to grow a new product line in a new industry. And our small business checklist is designed to help small businesses understand the commonly requested licensing, registration, and compliance needs at the local, state, and federal level. So you can find that at azcommerce.com/smallbiz. And the last website I want to mention is the state's COVID-19 information and resource page. It is a great page for all things COVID-19. It's arizonatogether.org. And then with that, we're going to transition to some updates. If you have restaurants, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund application is open. They have received a lot of applications. that will definitely exceed the funding. So if you're a small restaurant and you haven't gotten in, I would still try and see if you can't squeeze in and get something out of it. Also, PPP is still available, but not through traditional lenders. So it says the funds are exhausted except for CDFIs. CDFIs are community development finance institutions. So these community finance institutions had a set aside in the PPP funding, and they still have some funding in that set aside to help small businesses. So if you're still in the process, or if you think you're in the process of getting a PPP and you haven't heard from a while, your lender may have stopped and not communicated well, reach out to them to find out there's still a little bit of time left to process a PPP loan through a CDFI. Additionally, Local First Arizona has their We Rise Accelerator Program, and the application window is currently open for that Accelerator Program. So if you're interested in going through that, this link will take you to the program information page and the application page. And we'll post these links in the chat so you don't have to worry about trying to write them down really quick. And then the tax deadline, was extended, but the deadline was yesterday. So it was extended to yesterday. So if you haven't done your taxes yet, you are a day late at this point. So you want to definitely get your extension in or get them done as soon as possible if you missed that. So with that, we want to look at our upcoming session. So today we have how to motivate and incentivize employees with Brian Burt from the law office of Snell and Wilmer. On Thursday, we have bookkeeping basics with our expert friends from Coconino Community College, Central Arizona College, and Northland Pioneer College Small Business Development Centers. They are going to be with us for the next 4 Thursdays on doing some basic business finance sessions. So we're excited to have them with us. On Tuesday of next week, we get into cyber security. And then the following Thursday is understanding financial statements with that group of SBC centers. So we've got a number of great sessions coming up. We hope you can join us for all of them. And with that, we're going to go ahead and turn the time over to Brian Burt, who's a partner and chair of Emerging Business Group at Snell and Wilmer. Brian's been with us before and does a fantastic job on some of these legal things and making it so we can all understand it. So we appreciate it. And with that, we're going to go ahead and turn the time over to Brian.
All right, thanks, Robert. Great to be here again. Let me share the screen and we'll get going. All right, can we see that?
Yep, looks good.
All right. Well, thanks again to Robert and his team and the ACA for having me back. It's always a pleasure. Today's topic, we're going to talk about how to motivate and incentivize your employees. As usual, we're going to try to pack a lot into the next 55 minutes or so. And you're welcome to get a copy of the program after if you'd like a full slide deck. And if you're interested in chatting about any of these issues, always happy to offer a free initial consultation. So if you're on social media, I always like to see friendly feedback and Emerging Business with 1S. Just a little bit real quick about the firm. For those who may not be familiar, we've been around for a long time, at least by Phoenix standards. We've got 450 lawyers in our 15 offices these days. And we're a true full service firm. So all the resources you might need to start growing, hopefully sell your business at some point. A lot more information available on our website, including my weekly Emerging Business blog, kind of articles of interest to those in the entrepreneurial community. As Robert mentioned, I get to chair our firm's Emerging Business Group, so work daily with entrepreneurs, all shapes and sizes, from those starting their companies all the way through to those looking to cash out on the back end. And today's program comes at an interesting time. Obviously, it's been a fairly crazy year, no matter what company you've been with or if you've been trying to start your own. So I guess the question is, what's the best way to motivate folks? This is a joke, obviously, announcing they can keep their job for now. Should be, you would think, motivation enough for your employees. The fact that your company survived the COVID crisis, at least for now, and you're here in 2021, hopefully looking to reemerge, bring people back in and kind of hopefully take off in a little bit better trajectory. But yet we see that that's not the case. There's lots of jobs that are out there that they keep publishing articles showing how many available positions there are, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There's also a lot of people who are leaving and looking to do new things, leaving good jobs to find other positions. And so we have to kind of reevaluate and figure out what the new dynamics going to look like here going forward. So today's agenda, again, going to pack a lot in, move pretty quickly. Improving life at the office, improving quality of life, employment agreements, bonuses, giving employees ownership without actually giving ownership, and then finally making employees owners. So each year, MetLife does a great study. If you haven't seen that already, it's in its, I believe, 19th year. Just came out recently for 2021. Had a chance to take a look at it. And here's some key quotes to kind of kick off the study. I like to share just a little bit of information from it when I give this presentation, because I think it gives you kind of a perspective. Obviously, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, it's clearly time to rethink things. And at this point, people are just kind of unlocking what the effects will be. I hate that word, that phrase, new normal. So I'm not going to use it, but clearly there's going to be some changes. And so each business is grappling with how its model may have to adapt to both market needs and employee needs. Top 5 trends that are going to impact the workplace as we go forward here. Understandably, folks concerned about safety and expect employers to play a greater role in maintaining that safety, even as we emerge from the COVID era. More than 50% of employees are now concerned about well-being. So beyond safety, just kind of general well-being. And I think that's why some are heading for the doors, even if they have a good job. And you'd think people would not move or switch jobs in a pandemic, but they're doing that. Flexibility, what's that mean? We'll talk in more detail about that in a minute, but clearly there's going to have to be some acknowledgement that that's going to be a part of life going forward. Evolving benefits approach to kind of meet their needs of the employees, build resilience and support worker well-being. Again, kind of historically a bit squishy in terms of what folks asked for, what they wanted, particularly on the benefit side. And that's been changing for some time as we've gotten the younger generations and kind of what they're looking for. Changes are coming pretty swiftly, here in the new era. And support for other issues that employees may be interested in as you go forward. Additional findings, they've come up with, at least for now, a new formula for success. And you got it on the screen there. So productivity being linked to the things you see on the screen, ranging from support, communications, culture, which we'll talk in more detail about, particularly on the culture side. And keys to building that resilience. If your team has survived the last 12, 13, 14 months, they're going to kind of get their buy-in again. And here are the things that they indicate. Again, no surprises here, nothing shocking, fairly common sense, but for some employers, and I work with a lot of different companies in different stages of the life cycle, you see some doing it well and some doing it not so well. I think when you move to survival mode, things tend to get lost. And now that people are kind of coming out of that, assuming they are, gotta get back to the basics. And so there's been a complete blurring of line between work and personal, and that's having an impact as people try to transition back. Some want to stay at home, but obviously have a tough time managing that balance. Others want to come back and do so fairly rapidly and are seeing that what they had a year ago may not exist, at least in quite the same way as they did 12 months before. And some non-traditional benefits that folks want. What's good about the study, and again, we're just going to throw a couple more highlights and then we'll move to the next topic, is the discrepancy between what employees want and employers think they want. And so as we take a look at these benefits that folks are saying are now more important, again, some things that you've seen historically have been part of the mix, but other things are fairly new. Telehealth coverage, obviously a new thing. Lots of folks experimented with that in the past year. Having some support for home office setup. We did quite a bit of that when we went remote here at the firm back when things got started. And other benefits that, again, kind of look at a more holistic perspective than just your 401k and other things. So Point of all that is that things are changing. What's traditionally been things employees said they need to perform and be loyal. That mix is going to evolve, and encourage you to take a look at that study. It's pretty lengthy, as always, got a lot of good information packed in there, but I thought it's helpful to kind of give you a sense of where folks may be headed and what employees may be thinking as we go into this next phase. So the big question lots of folks are grappling with is this one: can a company's culture really survive when most people work from home? I've got my own opinions on that. I don't think you can. If you had a culture that was office-based, doing it from home, I don't think works. Everyone has their own opinion as to what it might look like going forward. Clearly, it's not going to be exactly the same as it was for any company. But I think for those companies that really focused on culture, and we're big on that here at the firm, that's why I've been here as long as I have, it's really important to get buy-in and get people back to replicate that. Otherwise, things, I think for a lot of folks, becomes a job. And if it's just a job, you're going to start losing people when other opportunities come up that offer higher compensation, different benefits, other things that person may be looking for at that particular time. And if they're really not getting the historic benefits of the culture, it's going to be tough for folks to really commit as they did before this all started. So, going to be one of the biggest issues. Some companies that said they're remote forever have changed their mind and are kind of walking that back and looking for a more hybrid model. So I don't think anyone's exactly sure where they're going to land, but it is a key question to ask. And for those companies that are a little less mature, or if you're on the call just looking to get started, you have a little more flexibility as to how you want to structure that versus a company that's been around for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Another thing that's really important, but not often done, is kind of creating a vision for the company and hiring individuals who believe in it. Two different things. So to the extent that the company doesn't have a vision, if you don't know what that company stands for, and if you look at some of the ones who are listed kind of pretty regularly on the best companies to work for and similar lists that you see out there, they each have a fairly definitive vision as to what they're trying to accomplish. And they're in a variety of different fields. So it's not just one type of business, but a variety of fields, but a genuine vision for what kind of workplace environment, customer experience, et cetera, they're trying to create. Then you've actually got to hire people who believe in it. Hiring really good people that don't buy into the vision is simply not going to work. And so that's the historic challenge, going to continue to be a challenge. Hiring really good sales folks that don't buy into the company's vision, going to end up costing you more than the benefits that individual brings in. And some things we saw in the study that I've had in the presentation for a while that become, again, even more important than before. Accountability. Folks were so, again, busy surviving that now they want to get back into it, understand how it's going to work going forward once we get out of survival mode. Rebuilding the trust. Some companies have had a fairly tough time keeping the trust of their people. That's going to have to be rebuilt. And again, nothing earth-shattering here, basic kind of common sense tips, but ones that lots of folks don't do. The communication thing, really critical. And if you didn't do well on this front, it may be tough to regain that trust. Even when there's not good news, letting folks know what to expect. We've had regular updates here at the firm on a variety of levels. And even if it's not the greatest news, at least it's coming, and there'll be an opportunity to ask questions and get answers. And I think that's what has been pretty important for us. And I know lots of other clients that have done similar approaches. Respectful workplace, always been important. These days you read about this in the news constantly, and hot button items, probably nothing hotter than that. Should be a given. And hopefully will be going forward for most companies, but that's going to be increasingly important as emphasis shifts to, again, these kind of qualitative type benefits. Regular feedback and recognition and career advancement. Again, as we move out of survival mode, people are going to look for, hey, what is it going to take for me to get back on the track? What's advancement look like? Is that different than what it was 12 months ago? And again, these things easily get lost when you're trying to make ends meet, retain people, figure out how you're going to get through the crisis. But now that hopefully is on the back end for most companies, or again, if you're just getting started, you have a unique opportunity to kind of build things from the ground up. Going to be important for people to know where they stand. Lots of folks aren't sure where their place in the business is. They're not sure if the business is going to have the same trajectory, what opportunities they've worked for are still around. And so it's important to let your team members know on an individual basis what they can expect and what it's going to take, again, in this new era to advance as they thought they were planning to historically. So some of these things on the next slide, again, I've done this presentation for many years, used to be things that people asked for and didn't often receive. And in the last 12 months, a lot of these things have been, particularly the telecommuting, work from home type thing. I think people have gotten an overdose of those things, and some have really thrived. Others, myself included, don't like to work from home. So you're going to have to figure out how to get a mix of opportunities. Again, making sure you're able to deliver to the clients, the customers that you're servicing, maintain that culture. It's going to be a tough challenge, but a lot of these things that historically improve life at the office, now you're going to have to kind of rethink that. Some of the things that I'm sure disappeared, like company events that people used to always complain about until you took them off the agenda. And then folks asked where that party went or that trip to the zoo went, I think are really important as you bring folks back. Seeing people live, nothing quite like it. You can do as many virtual calls or just regular telephone calls or other things, but actually bringing people back together as circumstances allow is really critical. It could be just a casual event, but those things are really important, not just to kind of build the team, but to make those reconnections that maybe went dormant over the past 12 months. And hopefully, having good admin, technology, other things, you had a lot of challenges in the past year. So lots of companies kind of ramp things up, and hopefully that'll continue to translate as folks kind of come back into the office or have a hybrid model, depending on what the expectation is. Finally, and the study bears this out year after year, ask the employees what they are looking for. There's typically a big disparity between what they want and what the employees think they want. So I encourage you to do some surveys. We've done a lot of those here at the office, and it's pretty interesting to figure out what folks are looking for. And sometimes it's a bit surprising as to what the expectations are. Doesn't mean you can give them everything they need. Again, companies' survival and ultimate success is going to be delivering value to your customers. So some of those suggestions or requests may not quite make sense in light of that goal, but really important to ask folks as they transition in this next phase what they're looking for. So as we move from the kind of qualitative stuff into the more specific tools, again, encourage you to look at the study, encourage you to kind of rethink what the office looks like going forward, talk to your folks, understand where the pain points are. And the rest of the presentation, kind of the second piece here, is devoted to talking about some specific tools that you can utilize in order to incentivize those folks. And if you've got key people you want to retain, now is a really good time to figure out how to do so, because lots of people, again, shocking as it is, are leaving. In some cases for jobs that aren't as secure as the ones they have. Again, makes no intuitive sense, at least initially, because why would everyone not stay put for the time being? But you're seeing the same types of things in the housing market. So there's a lot of trends that, again, you wouldn't expect to see happen are happening. These tools are not mutually exclusive. So you can use one or more. You may use certain tools with different employees. Again, it's not a one size fits all approach, but these are some things to think about. So employment agreements, you've got two types of employment, at least here in Arizona. You've got your at-will and you've got your employment agreement. The difference is you can always, and want to make sure, you can always terminate people at will, with or without cause. The difference in an employment agreement setting is that there are some restrictions, i.e. severance, that kicks in when you terminate people without cause. So always retain the flexibility, but sometimes in order to retain or attract folks, you're going to have to commit to them just like they're committing to you. You want them to leave that job. They want a 2-year commitment from you that you're not going to bring them in. They give up what they had on the plate currently, and then you drop them off the ship 3 months later because something else came along, some other individual you liked better. And so having that security that absent some cause on their part, some bad acts, et cetera, you're going to commit to them for a couple of years may be important, may be a key tool to bring them over. If you're creating job security with employment agreements, you've got to be careful about doing or saying things that seem innocuous, but can, from a legal standpoint, at least muddy the waters, if not kind of transform what was an at-will relationship into a situation where you may have to pay some severance or may have difficulty terminating if and when the time comes. So a lot of people said a lot of things, again, well-intentioned, things like, we'll take care of you, which sounds good. Well, what could be wrong with that? But to an employee who kind of gets sideways with the employer and looks for a way to hang on, things like this could be used against you. A handbook that specifies a process for terminating employees. You've got to follow that handbook. We've got lots of entrepreneurial ventures who love to borrow things from their buddies, download them from the internet, get them in all sorts of places. And I can tell you that probably, I'd say maybe 40 or 50% at most have actually read the handbook that they have implemented. Lots of folks just say, hey, if my buddy had it, I'm sure it's good. I'll put it in place, not understanding that they've transformed, again, employees to something less than at will because of the restrictions baked in there. Things that are said during a job review, same thing. And a employee handbook that provides people will only be terminated for just cause. If we were live and did a kind of a show of hands and some answers around the room, we quickly learned that there's no definition of cause. There's no one definition under the law of cause. So to the extent that you just use the word without more, it can mean all sorts of things. The employee who wants to not be terminated, that means they have to commit a felony in the workplace to get fired. For you, as the employer, it may mean, look, they just didn't perform as expected. You made some requests, you gave them an opportunity to improve, it didn't happen. And so for you, that's cause and thus your dispute. To avoid issues, here are some key tips. Develop and document the at-will status in all the materials and on a consistent basis. So there's magic language that you can put into your offer letter, your handbook, your other documents that make clear it's an at-will situation, can only be changed in writing by certain people. And so then you can feel free to say some nice things, have normal conversations, and not be as worried that you're going to transform folks into non-at-will employees, which is not the intent. And if you do have some procedures, you got to follow them. Best way to invite a claim is to not follow your own procedures. Just no reason to do that. But again, lots of folks are happy to follow them. They just don't know they're in there because they've not created their own materials or always vetted those that they've put into place. So I encourage you to do that. So always like to throw in some real world examples. What if? And these are things that have come up on a regular basis from different clients looking for advice. We've already mentioned the definition of cause that's not defined. There's no term. So the employee is going to say, well, I'm employed in perpetuity until that cause hits. That's not your intent, but that's what they're going to argue. We've seen folks do that. Doesn't give the ability to change the position. So what happens there? One of my favorites, you get a bonus, but it doesn't determine, or it doesn't say how it will be determined or by whom. This is one of the biggest things I see people end up fighting about, and in some cases ending up in litigation over, are bonuses that sound good on the front end. You're eligible for a 50% or 100% of your salary type bonus, and we'll figure it out after you get here. And it never gets figured out. And of course, you work toward the end of the year. Company did pretty well. The employee's expecting a payout, and the employer said, well, I actually had a different bar, a different set of expectations. You didn't quite meet those, or you met them, but not at least as much as I thought you would. So here's something much less than you expect, and that fight begins. And it doesn't specify what you get if you're terminated without cause. So just because there's a 2-year term on the employment agreement doesn't mean there's 2 years worth of severance. That severance could be 2 months, even though the term is 2 years. That really makes the agreement from the employee's standpoint a 2-month agreement, not a 2-year agreement, because if they get fired without cause, they just get 2 months worth of salary and perhaps benefits. So important to understand what the result is if folks get terminated. If you intended 2 months or 6 months, as opposed to 2 years, there's lots of different permutations you can put in there. It's got to be very clear. Of course, the employee is going to expect it's the full boat, the full 2 years. And again, lots of disputes arising from those ambiguous provisions. Minimum terms in an employment agreement. Again, if this is the tool that you decide to use, what's their position and what are they supposed to do? And your ability to change it because things do evolve. You may want to change their position, change their duties, and you don't want it to be a breach the minute that happens. Same with salary. What's the salary and how can it be changed if it can? Benefits, and always reserve the right to change. We started off the program by indicating that the kind of suite of benefits that folks are asking for is evolving pretty quickly. And before this, it was all about the cost of those benefits, healthcare, et cetera, and why that motivates employers to move from one carrier to another because they want to keep chasing a good price and not having to really jack up the employee's cost. And so you always wanted to reserve the right to change. These days, even more important. Otherwise, you may find yourself locked into a very expensive package that you no longer offer to everybody in the company because what you offer to that employee is locked in that employment agreement without the ability to say something like, hey, we'll offer you what we offer the management generally, as opposed to locking in a specific set of benefits for that individual. Really important, start and end date. You can always renew the agreement. Beware of those automatic renewals. No one ever follows the dates, and you see people getting auto renewed when you'd hope to let them go. Leads to lots of issues. Define the cause. We've talked about that already, but make sure you permit termination without cause. Define the severance, the bonus, how are you eligible, and how do you calculate it? Speaking of bonuses, next topic. There are different types of bonus programs. These 3 buckets are not legal terms of art. They're just buckets I've come up with that I think are easy ways to kind of think about it as you determine whether the benefits, again, kind of group of benefits is appropriate. You include the bonus as a piece of that. So the first type of bucket is the discretionary. There's no eligibility standard. There's no fixed amount. You just pay it when you feel like it. If an employee did well, it could be a one-off gift card to a restaurant, or it could be a $2,000 bonus at the year end. There's no expectations. There's no standards. It's just an ad hoc bonus when it makes sense to give them. The second one is a bonus where there's minimum eligibility criteria. So you have to do X to get a bonus, but we're not going to guarantee a certain amount. Here at the firm, for example, when the associates hit a certain number of hours, they're in the eligible category, but the amount depends on a whole host of criteria. And so that may be appropriate for your some of your team members as well. And finally, minimum eligibility, where you get a fixed bonus. There's a formula. And this may be, maybe there's a salesperson. Hey, if you sell X number of widgets and you bring in X number of revenue, you're going to get a certain percentage of that, or you're going to get a fixed amount based on what level you've achieved. If you're doing a bonus program in the first bucket, there's no need to put anything in writing. And you probably don't want to put anything in writing because that's the whole point of the plan. It's discretionary. And to put something in writing is going to start creating some expectations. On the other hand, the other 2 should be in writing. If you're bringing someone in, it should be in the offer letter. Or if they have an employment agreement and they're beyond the at will, then it should be in an employment agreement. Or if you're creating it fresh, maybe you're not expanding your team or hiring anybody new, but you decided put this in place after today's program, and as a way of motivating at least a certain subset of the team. Those second and third options, you should put in place some kind of written document. It doesn't have to be lengthy, but you have to define what it looks like. And again, it's so easy to mess this one up. We see it all the time. There's situations, and I like to give horror stories. I'll give one real quick here. We had a client who paid their people to bring in new clients, pretty standard, and they kept paying them. And there was nothing in the offer letters or the employment agreements that kind of had a mix of both that talked about when those payments would end. And so the employers expectation is, look, if you leave the company, we terminate you. Of course, that's going to terminate the bonus. Well, it didn't say that. And so people kept getting paid. Of course, no one's going to put their hand up and say, stop paying me. In fact, some said, look, there's nothing that cut that off. So I expect you to keep giving me the bonus. And there were some people living, making a couple $100,000 a year just on these historic bonuses. Clients were still at the company and they were still getting paid, even though they no longer work there. Well, long story short, it's tough to sell your company when you've got lots of money flowing out the door for bonuses that, again, they may have brought the client in 10 years ago, but there's no current value being given by that employee. They're long gone. And we had to end up buying out, the client that is, had to buy out all these bonus streams before they could sell the company. Ended up being about $6 million because someone found out the company was going to sell. And then, of course, hired their friendly neighborhood attorney and leveraged the company to get those streams repurchased before the sale took place. So it's one of those many situations. And for those who've heard some other programs, I say this all the time, there's little investments of time and cost and legal fees that can make some big impacts. And it's not just putting these incentives in place, but doing it correctly to make sure that type of story I just mentioned, which happens frankly all the time, doesn't happen to you. It's not expensive to create these and take some energy to define when do they kick in, when do they end, what are the termination points, how is it calculated? Is it going to be set in stone each year, or do you revisit it and recalculate or come up with a new formula at the beginning of each kind of bonus year? Liquidity bonus. So lots of folks are saying, you know what, you've created a good company and I want to be part of that mission. I want to be part of that team. But you know what, I want a piece of the action when you sell the company. If I'm going to stay here, and particularly for some of the young folks who are looking for more than just the kind of current payout, saying, hey, I'll stick with the company and I'll help you grow it. But when the time comes to sell it, I want to know that my work, my contributions will help yield kind of a piece of that action. And so the default for lots of employers is to say, all right, I'll think about putting a stock option agreement in place or some other equity program. And reality is that most employees will be happy with a liquidity bonus. And here's what that means. It can be based on a fixed amount or formula. We'll give a couple examples. If it's a formula, make sure it's on the actual profits from the sale, kind of the net profits of that transaction. And you can incorporate performance requirements. I encourage you to do that. Vesting that based on both time is good. That's kind of the default position. Well, each year you're with me, you get a little bigger share of the pie. And but consider performance requirements. There may be folks, frankly, lots of folks who them being there is good, but them performing is better. And it helps better align your what you expect of them and where you expect the company to grow to over the course of the next 3, 5, 7 years, and has everyone kind of swimming in the same direction. Typically, people have to be present to win. They've got to be there when you close the deal. And of course, everyone always asks the question, what can I terminate people right before a sale? Short answer is don't do that. If you like to get hit with a lawsuit, feel free to make that happen. If you don't, make sure that people are not dropped off the ship right before the sale. If people are obviously doing horrible acts in the office, then you can of course terminate them. But short of that, those performance-based terminations need to take place before you go down the road to sell the company. Otherwise, people will assume that's the reason, just to avoid paying. And it avoids actual ownership and all the related issues, which we'll talk about. But you've got to put it in place. You can't simply put it, give an oral promise or a one-liner. It needs to be well thought out. I've been doing lots of these bonus plans in the last 6, 12, 18 months as folks look for a way to keep people long-term beyond just the salary, the annual benefits, maybe a annual performance bonus, something more substantive, longer picture type incentives that don't actually involve giving out pieces of the company. And this is a great way to do that. A couple examples, a cash payment, it could be $250, it could be, it could be $10,000, it could be $5,000, it just depends on the nature of the employee. The more common approach is what you see in the second bullet, where they get a percentage of net proceeds when that transaction happens. And the net proceeds really do mean net proceeds. It's different calculating net proceeds than annual profits, because you've got transaction costs, you've got to pay back loans and other obligations, et cetera. You've got other things to think about as you kind of go to that net calculation. Another approach, liquidity bonus, I think is the simplest of these two. These are kind of two options when people want a piece of the company and you don't want to give them actual ownership. Both of these are great. I think the liquidity bonus is a little simpler. It's easier for people to get their arms around, say, hey, I'm creating a 10% pool of net proceeds. So if you sell the company for $1 million, you pay back a $100,000 loan and pay your legal and accounting fees to do the deal. Let's say there's 900,000 left. Knowing that there's a 10% pool there for employees to divvy up who are participants, fairly easy to get their arms around. They understand if you grow that $1 million to $2 million, that's more in the pot for them. And so I think it's a great way to go about it. And again, happy to talk to you if that's something of interest. The second approach, which folks may have heard of, is kind of phantom stock or stock appreciation rights. It's similar to the liquidity bonus, and you're not giving a piece of the company away. You're giving a contractual right to a bonus. It's just different in terms of how it's calculated. So people call them different things interchangeably, phantom stock versus stock appreciation rights. But at the end of the day, it's a right to receive a bonus based on the appreciation of the company. If you're getting the full amount, oftentimes you're calling that phantom stock or restricted stock units if you're in an LLC. And you just give them what the fair market value of the company's stock is at the time of sale. Stock appreciation rights, on the other hand, typically has a kind of a current grant date value, today's value, and they get the excess or the increase. In those two examples, you see one yields a bonus of 5, the other's a bonus of 150 because the company's gone up by $1.50 between the dated grant and the exercise date. So regardless of what you call it or how you do it, again, you're linking, instead of just a pool, you're linking their payout to the stock. And for some people, it's not super common, do a lot fewer of these, but there's some people who say, hey, if I can't be a stockholder, I'd like to be the next best thing. And so I want to know that as the founders stock appreciates or units in an LLC appreciate, that I'm tracking with that increase. And I think that's the best way for me to go. And so again, a lot of times it's psychological. There's similar tax consequences being ordinary income for both of these plans. Depending on how these new tax proposals shake out, the difference between ordinary income and capital gains may be either eliminated or reduced. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but we'll see. But for some people, it's just the psychological difference. They understand it's a little more complex. For you as the employer, there's a little more to do when you put this together in terms of coming up with and figuring out value of the stock, both today and each time you issue the grants. Versus liquidity bonus, no valuation exercise today is required. Advantages, you can, again, make employees feel like owners without giving equity. They're motivated to contribute. They don't have to put any cash in the hopper with either these phantom plans or the liquidity bonus. No buy-in. They're also doesn't have any issue with respect to being a private company. There's no need to have a liquidity discussion or conversation about, well, what do I do with my stock? How do I sell it? Again, avoids all those things. Avoids making people minority shareholder. For those who've had partners and had partnership disputes, which is pretty much every company owner I know, you can avoid some of the drama there and keep people just at a bonus perspective. You do have to keep two types of charts. One is the equity chart, one is the economic chart, because if you give 10% away in a bonus pool or phantom stock, you have 90% of the economics left come sale time. You have 100% of the stock, but just 90% of the economic benefits. So you need to keep track of both. Some of the disadvantages, sometimes it just doesn't create the same culture as folks who want to own pieces of the company. And I hear this quite a bit. Where folks say, you know what, it's just not the same for me as the employee. I really want to be an owner, and it's just not going to work. And I tried this with one client in particular. He had lots of conversations with a kind of key person he was bringing in, first big hire, and just couldn't get the person to kind of bite off on either the phantom plan or the liquidity bonus. Really wanted to be an owner, and it's more complex for both the employee. We'll talk about that as the last piece of the program today. It's certainly more involved for the employer, but sometimes that's the way it works because it just doesn't give the same benefits. Disadvantages we talked about in terms of tax may not be. We'll see. But hopefully, it currently obviously is a difference. And you have to consider some of the other issues. Some of these things don't kick in every case, but you have to always make sure you're covering the benefits, tax, accounting, any securities rules that might be kicking in. At the end of the day, both programs fairly easy to put together and administer, and really do help drive kind of consistent performance among those receiving those payments and helping companies work toward that sale goal. Finally, actual company ownership. So when I do this presentation, sometimes folks think this is all we're going to talk about is just how do we give out stock options, and this is just one piece. Obviously, we've talked about kind of the those kind of squishier benefits on the front end. Talked about the survey, talked about employment agreements, talked about some of the bonus structures, talked about some ways to give ownership without giving ownership, and this is giving actual ownership in these three pieces: a stock option, restricted stock, or a stock purchase. Stock options, if you're in a corporation, a stock option could be something to consider. If you're in an LLC, they don't work too well in LLCs, so you'll look at some of these other options. But a stock option is just what it sounds like, an option to buy shares of stock at a certain price. And the price is set to today's fair market value. So there are valuation issues. You've got to make sure the valuation is properly set. And they get the opportunity to buy that for a period of time, usually based on some vesting schedule, time and or performance. Again, encourage you to do both. And depending on the types of options, there's incentive stock options are non-qualified. You see the chart at the bottom. And for time's sake, we won't get into kind of all the nuances between those, but there can be some different tax treatments depending on what you give. Most companies are giving non-qualified options. And so when you get them, there's no tax. What happens? They hold them until the company sells. So the irony of stock options, to me at least, is they never end up typically becoming owners. They just hold them as options because they don't want to pay the exercise price as they go through the life cycle. They say, well, when the company sells, I will exercise and sell at the same time, and you can just pay me the difference. Sometimes there's cashless exercise and other ways to do it, or if the company fires that person or if they leave, they may exercise it. But for the most part, those options just sit there until there's a liquidity event. So it really, and again, ironically, doesn't give them the actual benefits of being true owners, but if it makes sense for them and helps motivate them, then that's okay. Restricted stock is getting actual stock. And this is something you'd see in a corporation, and it's giving stock and then losing it. So it's subject to forfeiture requirements or restrictions. And if you don't meet those vesting conditions, whether it's staying with the company or meeting certain performance criteria, you have to give it back. And so it's kind of a reverse vest situation. You don't get it, you can lose it. There's been studies done that show losing something is more painful than not getting it. So for some, this may be a good motivator. I've got the stock and I really don't want to lose it, so I'll make sure I hang on to the position or stay with the company until those restrictions lapse. For time's sake, we're not going to get into all the tax nuances of this option. Suffice to say, there's a big decision that folks make. Do I pay the tax all up front, hoping that I'm going to be with the company and the company is going to appreciate to make more sense to pay today's tax bill on today's value versus paying the tax as the vesting occurs. Those restrictions lapse and you'll get taxed on the value of the stock for which the restrictions lapse. It may be 5 chunks. And if the company has appreciated quite a bit, that second chunk could get a much higher tax bill than the first chunk, and so on. So you gamble if you're the employee as to whether to file that election to pay the tax all up front. And there is there is tax. This is, as we've talked through these, the first situation where you're going to get hit at somewhere along the way, whether it's up front or on those vesting dates. And so they need to understand that it's not just an incentive, there's something that goes with it. One of my favorite options for those who are in LLCs, and lots of entrepreneurs form LLCs and operate in LLCs, is my entity of choice, at least if you're getting started. Absent certain reasons to not be one, I think it's a great starting entity. You get maximum flexibility to structure the benefits, the economics, the management rights, etc. And one of the other benefits you get is the ability to give a tax-free piece of equity in the company, which we call an LLC profits interest or service unit. It's actual equity, but it is not taxable when the employee gets it, which is great. It's not like restricted stock, for example, and it's not like an option where you have to pay money to buy in, and usually they never do. It gives you a share of the future growth of the company. And the deal is it's not going to get taxed up front, but you don't get a piece of current or historic value. So if the company's worth $1 million and you give 10% in a profits interest, the company goes to sell for $1 million, they'd get nothing. If they help grow the company to $2 million, they'd get 10% of that second million. Simple example, but that's essentially how the profits interest works. So when they get the incentive, they're encouraged and incentivized to help grow the company, because that's where they will start to get value. The deal for them, no tax on the front end, which again, being an owner day one for no tax bill is very, very attractive to lots of people. Other critical issues to think about as you kind of work through these. The tax issues, obviously you got to make sure you understand both as the employer and the employee what the issues are. For employers who say, hey, I'll let the employees worry, excuse me, about that. Not the best approach. Last thing you're going to do is give your employee a tax bill and see them motivated to continue to do what you hope for. That can have obviously the total adverse impact. The accounting deal, plus it's not just the owner's company anymore. So for those who've been trucking along as a sole entrepreneur, maybe it's a family business, to bring people into the company has some pretty significant implications. So not that you shouldn't do it or can't do it, but just know that now it's, you've got things like fiduciary duties kicking in, at least for corporations. You can waive them in LLCs if you like. If you're in corporations, you've got lots of corporate protocols you have to follow. Entrepreneurs aren't big on following some of these protocols, so that may be something to think about if you bring folks in. And you do absolutely have to have an operating or shareholders agreement. I've done programs on that topic, and it really is critical. People are going to have disagreements. There's going to be challenges in terms of running the company. And these are just some of the things you would think about in those documents. Bottom line, the statute, whether it's in Arizona or any other state that you form your company in, does not give you a playbook for how to handle stockholder or member in an LLC relationships. People assume it does, it doesn't. It covers maybe 5, 10, 15% of the issues. Even the ones it does cover, you don't get the result that you typically think you would. It's not always intuitive. And for the other majority portion of the issues that aren't covered, you're going to be stuck in no man's land. So really critical to put that in place if you're thinking about bringing people in. From a securities laws perspective, when we talk about raising capital in some of the other presentations, there's a lot more challenges to looking at these securities laws and complying. The nice thing about compensatory benefit programs, which is what we've talked about today, is there's something called Rule 701, which allows you to fairly easily work through the challenges associated with giving out the plans. There's not a lot to do in most places. California's got a notice requirement in certain circumstances, but for most states, it's a self-executing exemption and fairly easy to use. So you want to make sure you comply, but it is fairly simple to do that in most cases. And you don't have to worry about it interfering with other stuff you would do in the company, whether it's raising capital, et cetera. And there is typically a state exemption based on Rule 701. So with that, let me see if there's any upcoming or any questions here. Feel free, we've got about 5 minutes left. I wanted to leave a couple minutes to ask questions. Before we do that, let me just throw up some upcoming programs. A lot of things in the next 60 to 90 days or so. Here's some of those programs. You can also check out my little personal website there. You see on the screen. I've got links to all of those upcoming programs and encourage you to check them out. They're all free and on a variety of different topics, all geared toward entrepreneurial businesses, whether you're just getting started or you're much further along in the life cycle. Encourage you to check out some of that content. Also, a final note about our monthly emerging business seminar. We've been doing it for 12 years now. We're going to be back hopefully soon at SkySong. Lots of folks looking forward to getting back live, hopefully maybe in September. But for at least the June program, most likely the August program, will continue to be virtual, talking about how to prepare a corporate succession plan. Next month, one of the things that I think is the most tragic is folks who spend sometimes decades building and sacrificing for companies, but have no idea how to exit and do so on the most attractive note. And so if you're starting a company, or if you're 10 years in, be a good program to think about attending, to figure out how to put in place a plan, whether you're planning to leave it to the kids and the family, or to sell it to some third party. Good to put that plan in place before that time comes. So with that, I'll throw it open. If there are any questions, you can submit those in the chat box. And as I mentioned, we'll, to the extent you want a full copy of the presentation, please feel free to reach out. And if you're interested in chatting about any of these topics, things that you might want to think about implementing for your company, happy to offer you a free initial consultation.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Again, as Brian mentioned, if you have questions, throw those in the Q&A or in the chat, and we can try to answer those. The presentation will be posted. The recording of this will be posted on the website, hopefully later today, along with a copy of Brian's slide deck with some information on how to contact him for that complimentary consultation that he mentioned. If you have questions. So please ask up. We got a few minutes left, a couple minutes here, but Brian's done a great job. He mentioned that list of upcoming presentations. A couple of those he's done with us in the past, and they're excellent. So if you get a chance to watch them, please do. He does a great job, as always. I don't see any questions popping up. I will mention I worked with a company that had a profit sharing incentive each year as a portion of the profits, and it was a great program, and there was a lot of people, and this was a very large company that did it. It made a lot of people a lot of money over time when they came time to them retiring. So interesting program. Brian mentioned is similar stuff, so it was a great incentive. Early on in my career. Let's see, we have one question here from Randy Schwartz. Says, hi, Brian, are there certain types of companies where you note that there is really a need to better engage employees, provide incentives, profit sharing, stock options?
Certain types of companies where you note there's a need to, I think I get the question. So I guess, I don't think there's any company where people don't want to be incentivized long-term. Again, maybe I'm not reading the question right, but I think that's really the answer. It's a question of which of these or combination of these things you do, ranging from the softer benefits all the way up to a piece of the company. I have yet to see a successful company clients that we worked with who there's not some program in place. Just expecting people to kind of come in and get a basic wage and go home. You may get people to work, and in some cases that's okay in the short term, but in order to really get people invested long term, there's got to be some kind of stake in it for them to really go above and beyond what kind of the day-to-day is, and to think more long term. If people are only thinking about today and not 2 years from now, you're just not going to get the same growth and buy-in and so forth that you would otherwise. So I don't know if there's any company that wouldn't benefit from at least a look at these things. I guess my final point on that would be to have a conversation and think through what makes sense for the employer before you start throwing things out to the employees, because it can kind of overwhelm them, and they may come back and really get excited about a plan that you're not interested in giving as an employer. So I would kind of get your ducks in a row from the high level first, what ones are you willing to offer, and who are you willing to offer them to? Again, it might not be for the whole team. It might be for select individuals or groups, for the managers, et cetera. And so, knowing what you're willing to give and to whom is a good starting point. And then you can go out and see how that might fit with their expectations.
Excellent. And that's a great one to kind of wrap up with, Brian, response. So thank you very much. We have hit that time. We appreciate everybody being with us today. And we look forward to seeing you on Thursday for Thursday's Bootcamp session, 9 a.m. Until then, everybody have a great week. And again, Brian, thank you for joining us today and sharing this information. And we look forward to having you on again. And everybody, we will see you later.
Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you.